So in the state of California, we have something called a handgun roster, and it sucks. Basically, it's a list of handguns that the state has approved for sale through licensed dealers. And unfortunately, if there's a specific handgun you're looking for and it's not on that list, you're not going to be able to buy it brand new from an FFL, even if it's completely legal and available in every other state, which is a huge problem. For starters, the roster itself is unconstitutional, which is why there's ongoing lawsuits challenging it right now under Ball v. Bonta, arguing that these restrictions prevent law-abiding citizens from purchasing state-of-the-art handguns, which are commonly used for self-defense everywhere elsewhere in the US. Now, the case is still currently pending, which means it hasn't reached a final decision yet, so in the meantime, we're stuck celebrating whatever new handgun manufacturers decide is worth jumping through all the hoops in order to get put on the roster. Which, speaking of hoops manufacturers have to jump through in order to get a handgun on the roster, it first has to meet a list of California requirements. That starts with the drop test, which California conducts separately from the one the manufacturer already does. Then it has to have a loaded chamber indicator, which honestly I really don't care. After that, it needs to have a manual safety, which again I don't personally use, but I also don't mind it being there since it doesn't get in the way. But the last one, and probably the most controversial one, is a magazine disconnect. Now, for those who don't know, a magazine disconnect is pretty much a feature that disables the gun from firing if the magazine is removed. Now, on paper, I get that this is supposed to be a safety measurement to prevent negligent discharges by people who assume a gun is unloaded once the magazine is out. But the reality is, this little safety feature can actually be far more dangerous than most people realize. Take this scenario. You're in a life-threatening situation and you go and draw your firearm, and either you or the attacker hit your magazine release. Now, you're left holding what looks like a loaded gun, but due to the magazine disconnect, it won't fire. Now, some people might think, well, it's just one round. That probably wouldn't have made much of a difference anyways, but you'd be surprised. Sure, one shot might have not stopped the threat completely, but it could have been enough to create an opening or make the attacker back off, giving you a chance to escape. The other scenario is, let's say for example, you're running low and you go and reload, you drop your magazine and you try to insert a new one, but it doesn't sit properly. Now, you might think you have a functional gun, but because the magazine isn't fully inserted, it won't fire. That could have otherwise fired once, but because of the built-in safety, you were left with a dead gun. Now, this last issue is one I don't hear many people talk about, but it's something I've thought about deeply, and maybe you guys can tell me if I'm overreacting or what, but I genuinely believe this so-called safety feature actually encourages bad habits, or even worse, reckless behavior. Think about it. You're basically giving someone the green light to treat a loaded gun like it's safe, just because the magazine is out. The logic becomes, well, there is a round in the chamber, but the gun won't fire without a magazine, so I'm good. That kind of mindset I believe is dangerous, especially when one grows accustomed to, because I don't care what kind of safety mechanisms are built in, there is no world where it would be okay to get reckless around the trigger of a loaded firearm. But that's exactly the kind of behavior that this feature can create, which with any other properly functioning handgun, that kind of recklessness would come with real consequences. Now look, I'm not a complete idiot. I understand that this safety has most definitely stopped multiple negligent discharges from happening, especially from those who develop recklessness habits around firearms, which I'm guessing a lot of those cases probably happened during cleaning when someone forgot they were still around in the chamber after dropping a magazine and they tried to pull the trigger, since some handguns require you to in order to get the slide off. So yeah, in those cases and probably others, a magazine disconnect has probably saved and prevented multiple accidents from happening. But here's the thing, it's solving a problem that comes from negligence, not from the gun itself. And instead of encouraging people to build safer habits and learn how to properly handle firearms, it conditions them to rely on a safety mechanism that even in the state of California, not all handguns have. For example, take the Glock 19 Gen 3, one of the most popular handguns still available through FFLs here in the state of California. This gun doesn't have any kind of magazine disconnect. Why? Because along with it and several other handguns that were here before those requirements were introduced have been grandfathered in and don't need to meet those requirements. So now think about all the thousands of handguns that are scattered across California, legally owned and regularly used, and someone who's developed unsafe habits, who's relied on a magazine disconnect for so long, happens to come across one. Now look, for a while I was carrying a P365 with a magazine disconnect, and it wasn't really by choice. It was because there was another issue stacked on top of the California roster requirements, and it's that in some counties, you're not legally allowed to remove the magazine disconnect if you plan to add that handgun to your CCW permit. And I wasn't sure where my county stood on that, so I played it safe and left it installed. But when it came time to renew my CCW permit, I asked directly, am I allowed to remove my magazine disconnect and still carry this gun? And in my case, they said yes. So I removed it, and while I was at it, I dropped a new trigger too, because that's something else my county allows. And unfortunately, since this varies from county to county, you have to check to see what modifications your county allows on handguns you plan to put on your concealed carry permit. So look, while the magazine disconnect wasn't the hardest thing to remove, it's still annoying knowing that until the roster is thrown out, I'll be stuck on YouTube, hopefully not losing any hair, trying to remove a safety feature that I and many Californians dislike because of the possibility of it one day putting our lives in danger. So that's all I gotta say. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing some CCW drills, make sure to check out my Instagram at ShadowTheWicked. Also, if you want to get in contact with me, that's a great place. But other than that, hope you guys have a good weekend. Stay safe and God bless.